Jake Morrison looked out through the thick glass window of the transport ship and felt his heart skip a beat. Unity Prime stretched out before them like a metal city floating in space. The massive station was bigger than anything he had ever seen. It looked like someone had taken a dozen cities and welded them together in a circle around a glowing core. Ships of every shape and size moved around it like insects around a bright light. "First time seeing it never gets old," said Lisa Carter from the seat next to him. She was the team's language expert and had been studying alien languages for 10 years. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore the same dark blue uniform as the rest of the human delegation. "Wait until you see the inside." Jake nodded but kept staring out the window. 3 months ago, he had been just another diplomat working on trade deals between Earth colonies. Now he was representing all of humanity at the Galactic Council. The weight of that responsibility sat heavy on his shoulders. "Are you nervous?" asked Helen Brooks from across the narrow aisle. She was older than the rest of them, with gray streaks in her black hair and lines around her eyes that came from years of difficult negotiations. She had been Earth's top diplomat before the aliens made contact. "A little," Jake admitted. "It's not every day you meet 47 different alien species." Colonel Ryan Hughes looked up from the datapad he had been reading. He was a big man with short gray hair and scars on his hands from his time in the military. "The briefings say most of them are friendly to humans. We helped save some of their people from pirates a few years back." "Most of them," Helen repeated with a slight smile. "It's the ones who aren't friendly that we need to worry about." Their transport ship shuddered slightly as it docked with Unity Prime. Jake felt his stomach flip as the artificial gravity switched from the ship's system to the station's. A few minutes later, they were walking through an airlock into the station proper. The corridor beyond was huge. The ceiling stretched up so high that Jake had to crane his neck to see it. The walls were made of some kind of smooth metal that seemed to glow with its own light. Aliens of every description walked past them. Some looked almost human except for different colored skin or extra arms. Others were so strange that Jake had trouble understanding what he was looking at. A tall alien with green scaly skin and yellow eyes approached them. He wore a dark red robe that swept the floor as he walked. "Ambassador Morrison," he said in perfect English, though his voice had a hissing quality to it. "I am Secretary Krell. Welcome to Unity Prime." "Thank you," Jake replied, trying not to stare at Krell's forked tongue. "We're honored to be here." "Indeed," Krell said, and something in his tone made Jake think the alien was amused by something. "Please follow me. The Council is eager to meet humanity's representatives." They walked through corridors that seemed to go on forever. Jake noticed that every alien they passed was carrying some kind of weapon. A group of insect-like creatures had plasma rifles strapped to their backs. A floating jellyfish-like being had energy cannons built into its body. Even the small furry aliens that looked harmless had what appeared to be some kind of blade attached to their belts. "Secretary Krell," Jake said as they walked, "I notice everyone seems to be armed. Is there some kind of security threat we should know about?" Krell's yellow eyes glittered. "Armed? Oh yes, of course. All species are required to bear weapons in the council chambers. It is ancient law, you understand. Very old tradition." Jake frowned. "Required? But we weren't told to bring any weapons." Yes," Krell said, and that amused tone was back in his voice. "Humans are exempt from this requirement. Consider it a special privilege." Lisa, Helen, and Ryan all exchanged looks behind Krell's back. Jake could tell they were all thinking the same thing he was. Why would humans be the only ones allowed to be unarmed? It didn't make sense. "Can you tell us more about this tradition?" Helen asked. "All will be explained in time," Krell replied. "For now, let us focus on the introduction ceremony." They entered a massive circular chamber that took Jake's breath away. The room was so large it could have held a football stadium. Curved rows of seats rose up from the center like an ancient amphitheater. Each section was clearly designed for a different species. Some had tiny seats for small aliens. Others had huge platforms for massive creatures. The chamber was full of noise as hundreds of aliens talked in dozens of different languages. Jake could hear Lisa muttering to herself as she tried to identify the different tongues being spoken. Every alien he could see was carrying at least one weapon, and many had several. Krell led them to a small section near the middle of the chamber. The seats were clearly designed for humans, which Jake found oddly comforting. As they sat down, he noticed that many of the aliens around them were staring. Some looked curious, others seemed almost sad, as if they felt sorry for the humans. A deep chime sounded through the chamber, and the noise gradually died down. A massive alien that looked like a cross between a tree and an octopus rose from the center of the room. When it spoke, its voice was translated into English through devices in their ears. "Fellow members of the Galactic Council," the alien said. "Today we welcome our newest member species. Humanity has proven themselves worthy of joining our ancient alliance through acts of courage and sacrifice." Jake felt a flush of pride at the words, even though he wasn't entirely sure what acts the alien was referring to. The ceremony continued with various species making short speeches about humanity. Most were polite and welcoming, though Jake noticed that a few seemed less enthusiastic than others. When it was Jake's turn to speak, he stood up and looked around the massive chamber. Hundreds of alien faces looked back at him, some friendly, some neutral, some hard to read. All of them armed except for the 4 humans. "Members of the Galactic Council," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation system. "On behalf of all humanity, I want to thank you for welcoming us into your alliance. We know we have much to learn, but we're eager to work with you to build a better future for all our species." The response was polite applause from most sections, though Jake noticed that some aliens barely clapped at all. When he sat back down, Helen leaned over to whisper in his ear, "Good speech, but did you notice how some of them are looking at us, like they know something we don't?" Jake had noticed. There was something in the way certain aliens looked at the human delegation. Not hostility exactly, but something close to pity. As if they felt sorry for humans who didn't understand something important. The ceremony continued for another hour with various speeches and formal declarations. When it finally ended, Jake was surprised to see an older human woman in a military uniform approaching their section. She had steel-gray hair and walked with the bearing of someone used to command. "Admiral Susan Cole," she said, shaking Jake's hand with a firm grip. "I've been Earth's military liaison to the Council for the past 5 years. Admiral," Jake replied. "I didn't know Earth had a military representative here." "There's a lot you don't know," Susan said, glancing around at the aliens filing out of the chamber. "Walk with me, we need to talk." As they left the chamber, Jake noticed that Susan wasn't armed either. In fact, now that he thought about it, he realized he hadn't seen a single human carrying a weapon since they arrived at Unity Prime. Every other species was armed. "But not humans, Admiral," he said as they walked through the corridors. "Can you tell us why humans are the only ones allowed to be unarmed here?" Susan stopped walking and turned to face the delegation. Her expression was serious, almost grave. "That's a long story, Ambassador, and it's not one you're going to like." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever was behind humanity's special status, it was clear that the full truth was much more complicated than Krell had let on. And from the look on Admiral Cole's face, it was also much more dangerous than any of them had realized. Admiral Susan Cole led the human delegation through the winding corridors of Unity Prime. They passed through several security checkpoints, where alien guards scanned them with devices that hummed and beeped. Jake noticed that the guards all carried heavy weapons and watched the humans with expressions he couldn't read. "Where are we going?" Lisa asked as they entered an elevator that moved both up and sideways at the same time. "Somewhere we can talk privately," Susan replied. "The walls have ears in this place, and not all of them are friendly." The elevator stopped at what seemed like a random floor. Susan led them down a narrow hallway to a small room with no windows and thick metal walls. She pressed her hand against a scanner, and the door sealed behind them with a soft hiss. "This room is secure," she said, settling into a chair at the small table in the center. "What I'm about to tell you is classified, but you need to know the truth if you're going to represent humanity here." Jake sat down across from her, feeling nervous. Helen and Ryan took seats on either side while Lisa remained standing, her arms crossed. "The truth about what?" Jake asked. "About why we're the only species allowed to be unarmed," Susan said. "It's not a privilege, Ambassador, it's a memorial." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jake felt his mouth go dry. "A memorial to what?" Susan was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, her eyes were hard. "To the people who died to earn us this right. It started 200 years ago with a man named Alex Turner." She activated a holographic display in the center of the table. Images appeared showing a small spacecraft floating in the darkness of space. It looked primitive compared to the ships Jake had seen at Unity Prime, with thick armor plating and simple weapons. "This was the horizon," Susan continued. "Captain Turner was leading humanity's first deep space exploration mission when they stumbled across something they weren't supposed to see." The display changed to show a massive alien vessel under attack. Smaller ships swarmed around it like angry wasps, firing energy weapons that lit up the darkness. Jake could see explosions blooming along the larger ship's hull. The council ship Eternal Wisdom was carrying Ambassador Prime Yelter of the Zenithians to a peace conference. Susan explained. Pirates had ambushed them. Multi-species raiders who didn't care about politics or diplomacy, just profit. Jake watched the battle playing out in the hologram. The council ship was clearly losing. Its weapons were powerful, but the pirates outnumbered them 3-1. What did Turner do? What any sane person would do. He should have jumped away. And reported what he saw? Susan's voice grew quiet. Instead, he did something insane. He flew his little ship right into the middle of the battle. The hologram showed the horizon moving between the council ship and the pirates. It was so small compared to the other vessels that it looked like a toy. Jake could hardly believe what he was seeing. The pirate leader was a Caltarian named Vex Darkspine. He was wanted on a dozen worlds for murder and worse. When he saw the human ship, he sent them a message. Susan touched a control and the room filled with a harsh alien voice speaking in broken English. "Little humans and little ship, you run now or you die with council dogs." Then another voice came through the speakers, calmer and clearly human. "This is Captain Alex Turner of the Earth vessel Horizon. You want the council ship, you go through? U.S. first." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The human ship was completely outgunned. Turner had to know he was signing his crew's death warrant. What happened next? Helen asked quietly. Susan smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. Turner and his crew held off those pirates for 3 hours. They used every trick in the book and a few that weren't. They rammed one pirate ship and disabled it. They used their cargo bay as a giant shotgun and took out another. They even convinced one pirate crew to switch sides by offering them a better deal than Darkspine. The hologram showed the battle in fast motion. The little human ship darted between the larger vessels like a fish swimming between sharks. Jake could see explosions and debris, ships spinning away disabled or destroyed. By the time council reinforcements arrived, Turner's ship was a wreck. Half his crew was dead and the other half was badly wounded. But they had saved the Zenithian ambassador and his entire delegation. Lisa leaned forward. "That's amazing, but I don't understand." "How does that connect to us being unarmed?" "Because that was just the beginning," Susan said. "Turner's sacrifice got the council's attention, but it didn't earn us special treatment. That came later with a different ship and a different captain." She changed the holographic display to show a space station. It was smaller than Unity Prime, but still massive, with docking arms stretching out like the spokes of a wheel. Nexus Station. 5 years after first contact, it was the main trading hub for this sector. Humans were starting to establish themselves as reliable merchants and security contractors. Susan paused. That's where everything changed. The display zoomed in to show the interior of the station. Jake could see a large conference room filled with aliens of different species. They all carried weapons, just like at Unity Prime. There was a trade conference going on. representatives from dozens of species trying to work out mining rights in the Kepler system. Everything was going fine until old grudges surfaced. Susan touched another control and the peaceful scene changed. Jake watched in horror as the conference room erupted into violence. Energy blasts lit up the space as aliens turned their ceremonial weapons on each other. The Corvin Empire and the Stellar Confederacy had been enemies for centuries. Some stupid comment about territorial rights, and suddenly they were shooting at each other in the middle of a diplomatic meeting. The holographic battle was chaos. Jake could see aliens diving for cover behind overturned tables while others fired wildly. Across the room, bodies were falling and the air was thick with smoke. Captain Danny Park was there with a small security team. They were escorting a human merchant named Lucy Chun. When the shooting started, Park had a choice. He could get his people out of there and let the aliens kill each other, or he could do something stupid, Jake said, already guessing. What had happened? Park and his team moved to the center of the room, right into the crossfire. They set up a defensive position using riot shields and started calling for a ceasefire. Susan's voice grew thick. For 3 hours they stood there, taking hits meant for other people. They protected wounded aliens, helped evacuate civilians, and somehow kept the two sides from completely destroying each other. The hologram showed human figures in the center of the chaos, their shields sparking as energy blasts hit them. Jake could see aliens crawling toward the humans for protection while the battle raged around them. Park died 2 days later from his injuries. So did 3 of his team. But they saved over 200 lives that day, most of them from species that weren't even involved in the original fight. Jake felt sick. They died protecting people who would have happily left them to die. That's not the worst part, Susan said quietly. The worst part is that the weapons everyone was carrying were supposed to be ceremonial. But ceremonial doesn't mean harmless when you're dealing with plasma rifles and energy blades. The law requiring weapons in diplomatic meetings was supposed to be symbolic, but it had created a culture where every disagreement could turn into a bloodbath. She turned off the holographic display and the room fell silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in the quiet. After Nexus Station, the Council had to face some hard truths, Susan continued. For thousands of years they had required weapons at diplomatic meetings as a show of strength. But they had forgotten that strength can mean different things to different species. What do you mean? Ryan asked. Most species see strength as the ability to project force, to make others afraid of you. But humans, Susan looked around the table at each of them. Humans showed them that sometimes the greatest strength is the willingness to absorb violence meant for others. Jake was beginning to understand. So they changed the law. They voted. 24 species in favor, 21 against, 2 abstentions. The motion passed by just 3 votes. Susan's expression grew serious. Humans would be exempt from carrying weapons in council chambers because they had proven that the greatest weapon is the courage to stand defenseless between enemies. But not everyone was happy about it, Helen said. No, a lot of species saw it as favoritism. They said humans were naive peacekeepers who didn't understand how the real galaxy worked. Others claimed we were dangerous because we were unpredictable. Susan stood up and began pacing. Some of them are still angry about it. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders again, heavier than before. So every time we walk into that council chamber unarmed, we're representing all the humans who died to earn us that right. Exactly. Turner, Park, and dozens of others who made the same choice. They could have walked away from fights that weren't theirs. Instead, they chose to stand between the strong and the weak, even when it meant dying for strangers. Lisa wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. No wonder some of the aliens look at us with pity. They think we don't understand what we've gotten ourselves into. Jake Morrison couldn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about Captain Turner and Captain Park, about the humans who had died to earn his species the right to walk unarmed among armed aliens. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the holographic images of those battles, of small human ships facing impossible odds. He got up early and found Lisa Carter already awake in the delegation's common area. She was sitting at a table with her datapad, studying something intently. Couldn't sleep. Either? He asked, pouring himself coffee from the machine in the corner. I've been reading about the Nexus Station incident, Lisa said without looking up. Admiral Cole didn't tell us everything yesterday. Jake sat down across from her. What do you mean? Lisa turned her datapad so he could see the screen. It showed a news report from the Galactic Information Network, dated 5 years ago. The headline read, "Bloodbath at Nexus Station claims 127 lives." 127 dead, Lisa said quietly. And Admiral Cole said the humans saved 200 lives. That means over 300 people were in that conference room when the shooting started. Jake felt his stomach twist. That's a lot of people. It gets worse. Lisa scrolled down to show images from the aftermath. The conference room looked like a war zone. Blast marks covered the walls, furniture was overturned and burned, and there were dark stains on the floor that Jake didn't want to think about. The Corvan Empire and the Stellar Confederacy had been at peace for 50 years before this happened, Lisa continued. But peace doesn't erase centuries of hatred. All it takes is one wrong word, one insult, and suddenly everyone's shooting. Helen. Brooks joined them, looking tired but alert. I've been reading about it too, she said. The official report is classified, but I found some witness statements. The humans didn't just stand in the crossfire. They actively put themselves between the two sides. What do you mean? Jake asked. Helen sat down and pulled up her own datapad. According to a Moralian diplomat who was there, Captain Park didn't just set up a defensive position. When he saw that the Corvan and Confederacy forces were about to flank each other, he moved his team to block their lines of fire. Jake stared at her. They deliberately put themselves in the way? Every time one side tried to get a clear shot at the other, the humans moved to block it. They took hits that were meant for their enemies. Helen's voice was barely above a whisper. They didn't just absorb random fire, they absorbed it on purpose. Ryan Hughes appeared in the doorway, already dressed in his uniform. We need to get ready for the trade conference, he said. But first, you should know that Admiral Cole wants to brief us on the situation. They met Susan in the same secure room they had used the day before. She looked grim as she activated the holographic display. The trade dispute we're dealing with today isn't just about mining rights, she began. The Epsilon Reticuli Consortium has been losing ships to raiders for the past 6 months. They're convinced that the Outer Rim Collective is either supporting the raiders or looking the other way. The display showed a star map with red dots marking the locations of attacks. Jake could see that they formed a pattern around the disputed territory. The Rim Collective denies any involvement, but they've been struggling economically. Their agricultural worlds have been hit by crop failures, and they need the mineral wealth from the disputed systems to survive. So we have one side that's being attacked and another side that's desperate, Helen said. That's a dangerous combination. It gets worse, Susan continued. Both sides have been building up their military forces. The Reticuli have hired mercenary fleets, and the Rim Collective has been making deals with some very unsavory characters. Jake felt a chill. You think it's going to turn violent? I think it already has turned violent. The question is whether it's going to turn violent in the council chamber. Susan turned off the display. That's where you come in. What do you mean? You're going to be the mediator. The council has asked humanity to oversee the negotiations because we're seen as neutral. Susan's expression was serious, but neutral doesn't mean safe. If shooting starts, you'll be right in the middle of it. Lisa looked pale. We're diplomats, not soldiers. We don't have any training for combat situations. You don't need combat training, Susan said. You need courage. The same courage that Turner and Park showed. They spent the next hour reviewing the details of the dispute and the positions of both sides. Jake tried to focus on the technical details, but his mind kept wandering to the images of Nexus Station. Would he have the courage to stand between armed enemies? Would his team? The trade conference was held in a smaller chamber than the main. council hall, but it was still impressive. Curved walls rose up to a domed ceiling, and the seats were arranged in a circle around a central area where the mediators would sit. Representatives from both sides filed in, and Jake noticed immediately that they were all heavily armed. The reticuli delegation carried energy rifles that hummed with barely contained power. The Rim Collective had what looked like projectile weapons, old-fashioned but effective. "Remember," Helen whispered as they took their seats in the center, "we're here to find a solution, not to take sides." The session began quietly enough. Jake listened as both sides presented their cases. The reticuli spokesman, a tall alien with blue skin and 4 arms, spoke about the attacks on their mining ships. His voice was calm, but Jake could see the anger in his dark eyes. 17 ships lost in 6 months, the reticuli said. Hundreds of lives lost, millions of credits in stolen cargo, and every attack happens in systems controlled by the Rim Collective. The Rim Collective's representative was a smaller alien with gray fur and large eyes. She spoke in a high, musical voice. That made her sound harmless, but Jake could see the weapons her guards carried. "We patrol those systems as best we can," she said. "But space is vast and our resources are limited. We cannot be everywhere at once." "Cannot or will not," the reticuli spokesman shot back. "We will not waste our ships chasing ghosts while our people starve," the Rim representative replied, her voice rising. Jake could feel the tension in the room building. The guards on both sides were shifting nervously, their hands moving closer to their weapons. This was exactly how the Nexus Station incident had started. "Let's focus on solutions," Jake said, trying to keep his voice calm. "What would it take? For both sides to feel secure?" For the next 2 hours, they went back and forth. The reticuli wanted the Rim Collective to provide escort ships for their mining operations. The Rim Collective wanted compensation for the resources they would have to commit. Neither side was willing to compromise. Then the reticuli spokesman said something that made everyone freeze. "Perhaps the Rim Collective would be more cooperative if they knew what happened to the last group that tried to steal from us." The Rim representative's eyes went wide. "Are you threatening us?" "I am stating facts," the reticuli replied. "The pirate base on Kepler 7 no longer exists. Neither do the pirates who used it." Jake felt his heart start to race. The Kepler 7 raid had been a major news story 3 weeks ago. A pirate base had been completely destroyed with no survivors. The reticuli had denied involvement, but now their spokesman was all but admitting they had done it. "You murdered them," the Rim representative said, her voice shaking with rage. "You slaughtered them without trial, without mercy. We defended ourselves," the reticuli said, "as we will continue to do." The room erupted. Guards on both sides raised their weapons, shouting orders and threats. Jake heard the whine of energy weapons charging and the click of projectile weapons being readied for firing. In the chaos, Jake saw something that made his blood run cold. A young Rim Collective aide, barely more than a child, was caught between the 2 groups of guards. She was frozen with fear, directly in the line of fire. Without thinking, Jake stood up and walked toward the center of the forming battle line. He could hear Helen calling his name, but it seemed to come from very far away. All he could see was the terrified young alien who was about to be caught in the crossfire. "Stop," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the chaos. "Just stop." The room didn't quiet immediately. Guards continued to shout and weapons remained raised, but Jake kept walking until he was standing directly between the 2 groups, his arms spread wide. "There's a child here," he said, looking back and forth between the armed guards. "She's not part of this fight. She doesn't deserve to die for your anger." The reticuli spokesman lowered his rifle slightly. "Human mediator, you should move away. This is not your conflict." "It became my conflict the moment you brought weapons into a diplomatic meeting," Jake replied. "It became my conflict the moment you decided that might makes right." He could see Lisa, Helen, and Ryan moving to join him. They looked terrified, but they were moving anyway. Lisa positioned herself next to the young aide, while Helen and Ryan flanked Jake on either side. "We're not armed," Jake said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. We can't hurt you and we can't stop you from hurting each other. But we can remind you what you're fighting for. The Rim representative had tears in her eyes. You would die for us? For people you don't even know? Jake thought about Captain Turner and Captain Park, about all the humans who had made this choice before him. Someone has to. The emergency session was called for the next morning. Jake Morrison woke up to find Admiral Susan Cole standing in his quarters with a grim expression on her face. Get dressed, she said without any greeting. The council is in chaos. Jake sat up quickly, instantly alert. What happened? Word about yesterday's incident spread through the station overnight. Some species are calling what you did heroic. Others are saying it proves humans are too dangerous to be trusted. Susan moved to the window and looked out at the stars. There's going to be a vote. A vote on what? On whether humanity should keep its special status. Whether you should still be allowed to walk unarmed in council chambers. Susan turned back to face him. Some species think yesterday proved humans are unpredictable. They want you armed like everyone else. Jake felt his stomach drop. And if we lose? Then everything Turner and Park died for becomes meaningless. Humans become just another armed species in a galaxy full of weapons. Jake got dressed quickly and met the rest of his team in the common area. Lisa Carter looked like she hadn't slept at all, her eyes red from reading reports all night. I've been monitoring the communication networks, she said. The reactions are split right down the middle. Half the species are praising us for preventing bloodshed. The other half are terrified because we inserted ourselves into a conflict that wasn't ours. Helen Brooks was pacing back and forth, her diplomatic mind working through the problem. Who called for the vote? The Corvan Empire, Susan replied. They're one of the species that lost people at Nexus Station. They've never been happy about humanity's exemption. Ryan Hughes looked up from his own datapad. The military networks are buzzing too. Some species are saying that if humans don't have to carry weapons, maybe no one should. Others are arguing that weapons are the only thing keeping the peace. They made their way to the council chamber, and Jake could feel the tension the moment they walked in. The massive room was packed with representatives from all 47 member species, and the noise level was higher than he had ever heard. Aliens were arguing in dozens of different languages, gesturing wildly with their weapons. Secretary Krell approached them as they took their seats. His yellow eyes seemed more amused than usual. Quite the stir you have caused, humans, he said. I hope you are prepared for what comes next. What do you mean? Jake asked. The vote will not be simple. Each species will have a chance to speak about humanity's status. Some will defend you. Others... Krell's forked tongue flicked out briefly. Others will not be so kind. The session began with Prime Ambassador Yulter of the Zenithians calling for order. The ancient alien's tree-like form towered over the chamber as he spoke. Fellow council members, we are here to discuss a matter of great importance. The question before us is whether humanity should continue to be exempt from our weapon-bearing requirements. A massive alien that looked like a living rock stood up in the Corvan section. When he spoke, his voice was like grinding stone. The Corvan Empire calls for an end to this dangerous favoritism. Yesterday's incident proves that humans cannot control themselves. They interfere in conflicts that do not concern them. They make situations more dangerous, not less. Jake felt his face flush with anger, but Helen put a hand on his arm to keep him seated. Another alien rose from the Stellar Confederacy section. She was tall and elegant, with silver skin that seemed to glow in the chamber's light. The Confederacy disagrees. The humans yesterday prevented what could have been a massacre. They put themselves in danger to protect others. This is exactly why they earned their exemption in the first place. For the next 3 hours, Jake listened as species after species debated humanity's fate. The arguments fell into clear patterns. Those who had been helped by humans in the past spoke in their favor. Those who had never needed human assistance questioned why one species should be treated differently. The Morallans, whose diplomat had been saved at Nexus Station, spoke passionately about human courage. The insectoid Zephyrians, who had lost a trade ship to the same pirates Turner had fought, called humans necessary guardians of peace, but others were less kind. The Voltari Collective called humans dangerous pacifists who create chaos through good intentions. A species called the Hegemony argued that special treatment breeds resentment and undermines council unity. The most painful moment came when a representative of the Kalmar Federation stood up. The Kalmars were a peaceful species that looked like tall, thin humans with blue skin. They had been some of humanity's earliest supporters. "We have watched humans for 200 years, the Kalmar said sadly. "We have seen their courage and their sacrifice. But we have also seen how their actions divide us. Perhaps it is time to end this experiment and treat all species equally." Jake felt his heart sink. If they were losing the support of allies like the Kalmars, what chance did they have? Finally, it was time for the human delegation to speak. Jake stood up on shaking legs and looked around the massive chamber. Hundreds of alien faces stared back at him, some friendly, some hostile, most simply curious. "Members of the Galactic Council," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the translation system. "Yesterday, my team and I did what we thought was right. We saw innocent people in danger and we acted to protect them." The chamber was completely quiet now, every alien listening intently. "Some of you say this proves humans are dangerous, that we interfere where we shouldn't, that we make situations worse." Jake paused, gathering his courage. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it would be easier if we just carried weapons like everyone else. Maybe it would be simpler if we solved problems with force instead of sacrifice." He could see confusion on some faces. This wasn't the defense they had expected. "But if we do that, we become just another armed species in a galaxy full of weapons. We become part of the problem instead of part of the solution." Jake's voice grew stronger. "Captain Turner could have run from those pirates. Captain Park could have evacuated his people and let the aliens kill each other. Yesterday, we could have stayed in our seats and watched two sides destroy each other." Jake looked directly at the Corvan representative who had spoken against them. "But we didn't and we won't. Because someone has to stand between the strong and the weak. Someone has to absorb the violence instead of adding to it. Someone has to prove that there's another way." He sat down to complete silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Prime Ambassador Yelter called for the vote. "All those in favor of maintaining humanity's exemption from weapon-bearing requirements?" Jake held his breath as lights began appearing on the voting display. Each species was represented by a colored dot, green for yes, red for no, yellow for abstention. The dots appeared slowly, one by one. The Zenithians voted yes. So did the Morallans and the Stellar Confederacy. The Zephyrians voted yes, followed by several smaller species that Jake didn't recognize, but the red dots were appearing too. The Corvan Empire voted no, as expected. So did the Voltari Collective and the Hegemony. Other species Jake had hoped would support them showed red lights. The count was agonizingly close. 22 yes, 21 no, with 4 abstentions remaining. They needed just one more vote to maintain their majority, the Kalmar Federation's light appeared, yellow, abstention. Jake's heart sank. If the remaining 3 species all voted against them, it would be a tie, and ties went to the status quo. But which way was the status quo, for or against weapons? The next light was green. A species called the Harmony Coalition voted yes. 23 to 20-1. Another red light appeared. The Apex Dominion voted no. 23 to 20-2. Everything came down to the final vote. The light that would appear belonged to a species Jake had never heard of, the Eternal Watchers. They were an ancient race that rarely spoke in council sessions, preferring to observe rather than participate. The chamber was completely silent as everyone waited. Jake could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. The light appeared green. The chamber erupted in noise as aliens began talking, arguing, and celebrating all at once. The final vote was 24 in favor, 22 opposed, with 1 abstention. Humanity had kept its exemption by just 2 votes. Prime Ambassador Yelter called for order, his deep voice cutting through the chaos. The motion to maintain humanity's special status has passed. Humans will continue to be exempt from weapon-bearing requirements in council chambers. Jake felt relief wash over him, but it was mixed with something else, uncertainty. They had won, but barely. Nearly half the council thought humans were too dangerous to trust unarmed. As the session ended and aliens began filing out, Secretary Krell approached the human delegation once again. His expression was unreadable. "Congratulations, humans. You have kept your privilege." "It's not a privilege," Jake said, remembering Admiral Cole's words. "It's a responsibility." "Indeed," Krell replied. "And responsibilities can be taken away if they are not handled properly." The reptilian alien walked away, leaving Jake with a chill running down his spine. They had won this vote, but it was clear that humanity's special status would always be under scrutiny. Every action they took would be watched, judged, and debated. As they left the chamber, Admiral Cole joined them in the corridor. She looked relieved but not entirely happy. 2 weeks after the vote, Jake Morrison thought things had finally settled down. The human delegation had successfully mediated 3 minor disputes, and the tension in the council chambers seemed to be easing. Other species were starting to treat them normally again instead of watching their every move. He should have known it was too good to last. Jake was reviewing trade reports in his quarters when his communication device started buzzing with urgent alerts. He answered to find Admiral Susan Cole's worried face on the screen. "We have a problem," she said without any greeting. "Get your team and meet me in the secure room, now." Jake found Lisa Carter, Helen Brooks, and Ryan Hughes already gathered. When he arrived, Susan was pacing back and forth, her face grim. "What's happening?" Jake asked. "The Corvan Empire and the Stellar Confederacy are at it again," Susan replied. "But this time it's not just angry words. 3 hours ago, Corvan forces attacked a Confederacy mining station in the disputed Vega system." Jake felt his stomach drop. "How many casualties?" 47 dead, including civilians. The Confederacy is calling it an active war. Susan activated the holographic display, showing news reports from across the galaxy. Both sides are mobilizing their fleets. "We could be looking at the first major galactic war in 200 years. Lisa looked pale. "What does this have to do with us?" "The Council has called an emergency session. Both sides are demanding immediate action. The Corvans want the Council to recognize their right to defend their territory. The Confederacy wants the Council to condemn the attack and authorize military intervention." Helen was already thinking like a diplomat. They can't both get what they want. Someone's going to be angry, no matter what the Council decides. "That's not the worst part," Susan continued. "Both sides have demanded that the session be held under full combat protocols. Every representative will be required to carry their heaviest weapons. They're treating this like a war council, not a diplomatic meeting." Jake understood immediately. "And we'll be the only ones unarmed. In a room full of species that are one step away from shooting at each other," Susan confirmed. "Some of the council members are already saying this proves humans shouldn't be exempt from weapon requirements." "They're calling you sitting ducks," Ryan spoke up for the first time. "Maybe they're right. Maybe we should ask for a special exemption to carry weapons just this once." "No," Jake said firmly. "If we carry weapons now, we'll have to carry them forever. We'll be just another armed species." "Better than being a dead species," Ryan muttered. "Ryan's got a point," Lisa said quietly. "This isn't like the trade dispute. These people are already shooting at each other. They won't hesitate to shoot at us if we get in their way." Jake looked around at his team. He could see the fear in their eyes, and he couldn't blame them. Walking into a room full of heavily armed aliens who were ready for war was probably the most dangerous thing any of them had ever done. "We have a choice," he said finally. "We can ask for weapons and prove that peaceful solutions only work when everyone's safe. Or we can trust in what Turner and Park believed in." "And if we're wrong," Helen asked, "then we'll die the way they did, trying to stop a war instead of starting one." The emergency session was held in the main council chamber, but it looked completely different from the peaceful meetings Jake was used to. Representatives didn't just carry their usual ceremonial weapons. They brought military-grade equipment that belonged on battlefields. Not in diplomatic meetings, the Corvan delegation arrived in full battle armor, carrying plasma cannons that could level buildings. The Confederacy representatives wore personal shields and carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Other species brought their own impressive arsenals, turning the chamber into what looked like a weapons exhibition. In the middle of it all, the four humans sat in their simple chairs with nothing but their diplomatic pouches and communication devices. Secretary Krell approached them as the session was about to begin. His usual amusement was replaced by something that might have been concern. Are you certain about this, humans? Even your allies are carrying extra weapons today. No one would think less of you if you asked for protection. We appreciate the concern, Jake replied, but we'll be fine. Krell's yellow eyes studied him for a long moment. I hope you are right. The session began with Prime Ambassador Yelter calling for order, but his usual authority seemed diminished by the weapons surrounding him. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of worry that Jake had never heard before. We are here to address the crisis in the Vega system. The situation is grave and requires The situation requires justice. The Corvan general who spoke was massive even by Corvan standards, his battle armor making him look like a living tank. The Confederacy has been supporting pirates and terrorists for months. We acted in self-defense. The Confederacy admiral who stood up in response was smaller but no less impressive. Her personal shields shimmered around her like heat waves, and the weapon she carried could have melted. The Corvan's armor. Self-defense? She shouted. You attacked a civilian mining station? You murdered innocent workers? Workers who were stealing resources from Corvan territory. Territory that you claimed illegally. The shouting match escalated quickly. Other species began taking sides, their own historical alliances and grudges surfacing. Jake watched in horror as weapons began to power up around the chamber. This is exactly what happened at Nexus Station, Lisa whispered, but this was worse than Nexus Station. These weren't just representatives with ceremonial weapons. These were military officers with battlefield equipment, and they were already at war with each other. The moment that changed everything came when a young Confederacy aide accidentally bumped into a Corvan guard while trying to deliver a message. The guard, already on edge, spun around with his weapon raised. Confederacy spy! He shouted. The aide, barely more than a child, stumbled backward in terror. The guard's weapon was charging up, its targeting laser painting a red dot on the young alien's chest. Jake was moving before he even realized it. He stepped between the guard and the aide, feeling the heat from the weapon's targeting system on his face. Stand down, he said quietly. The Corvan guard stared at him in disbelief. Human, you are not armed. Move away or you will die with the spy. She's not a spy. She's a child who made a mistake. Jake kept his voice calm even though his heart was racing, and I'm not moving. The chamber had gone quiet, everyone watching the confrontation. Jake could feel the targeting laser moving across his chest as the guard's weapon tracked him. You would die for a Confederacy whelp? I would die to prevent a war from starting in a place meant for peace. Lisa, Helen, and Ryan moved to stand beside him. They looked terrified, but they stood firm. Around the chamber, Jake could see other young aides and support staff from various species, all of them caught between the armed delegates. Look around, Jake said, raising his voice so everyone could hear. Look at what you're about to do. You're going to turn a diplomatic chamber into a battlefield. You're going to kill children and civilians along with your enemies. The Corvan general who had started the argument stepped forward, his massive weapon trained on Jake. The human speaks of peace while war has already begun. There is no room for weakness now. This isn't weakness, Jake replied. This is strength. The strength to stand between enemies and remind them what they're fighting for. We fight for our people. Then don't dishonor them by murdering children in a council chamber. Jake's voice echoed through the hall. Turner and Park died to show the galaxy that there was another way. Don't let their sacrifice be meaningless. For a long moment, the chamber was frozen. Armed aliens faced each other across a space occupied only by 4 unarmed humans and a handful of terrified support staff. Then, slowly, the Corvan guard began to lower his weapon. "The human speaks truth," he said reluctantly. "This is not a battlefield." The Corvan general's weapon remained aimed at Jake. "You think your words can stop a war, human?" "I think my death will start a bigger one," Jake replied. "Kill me, and you don't just fight the Confederacy. You fight every species that believes in what humanity represents." Around the chamber, Jake could see other representatives lowering their weapons. Not all of them, but enough. The moment of maximum danger was passing. Prime Ambassador Yelter's voice cut through the tension. "The human mediator speaks wisdom. This chamber is for words, not weapons. All forces will stand down immediately." It took another hour to restore complete order. When it was done, Jake found himself face to face with both the Corvan general and the Confederacy admiral. "You are either very brave or very foolish, human," the general said. "Maybe both," Jake admitted. The admiral studied him with curious eyes. "You really would have died to protect our people?" "Someone has to stand for peace," Jake replied. "Even when peace seems impossible." The rest of the session proceeded without violence. The two sides were still angry, still ready to fight, but they kept their weapons holstered. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a peaceful one. As the delegates filed out, Secretary Krell approached Jake one final time. His expression was no longer amused but respectful. "I understand now, Human Morrison. Your species is not permitted to be unarmed in our chambers. Your species is trusted to be unarmed.